Good morning, dear friends from Prague, again for a new episode of the interviews of Forum 2000 with distinguished and very interesting guests on the other side. My name is Jan Schneidauf. I work at the Czech Foreign Ministry, but here I am in the role of a moderator, which is a comfortable position to a big extent because it allows me to ask questions and listen a lot without needing to say too much myself, which is a position I cherish. And we have a guest today here who has much to say on a variety of very interesting and important issues. It's Mr. Nicolas Tenzer. I hope it's Tenzer.
Tenzer is fine. Tenzer is fine.
Okay. And Mr. Tenzer is a professor or has been professor for many years at Sciences Po and other academic positions. He has a track record of senior positions in the French government as well, inter alia, having advised the French Minister of Economy and Finance. You are, Mr. Tenzer, president of the Center of Study and Reflection for Political Action, which is an organization you founded and you've had it for the past, 35 years. So again, a very interesting background. And with this, and having spoken quite long already, I would like to pass the floor to you. There now seems to be a sort of fresh internationalism or signs of some fresh internationalism, some new elements in there, whether it is with the advent of the new administration in the US, whether it is with the pandemic and what it means in various fields, whether it is with some changes in Europe. So perhaps you would have some insights on that.
Thank you very much for your invitation. Just sorry not to be in Prague this time with you. Hope it will be very soon. Well, I think that my position probably is not, I think, completely mainstream, probably, in France right now, because it's a position that really is advocating the very meaning of human rights and freedom, in the world stage. I think it's something that I am saying and writing since many years, that now we are entering a true global confrontations between two systems. One system that is completely directed by some authoritarian powers, and more than authoritarian powers, I would say criminal powers, who try to impose their worldview and aiming at dismantling completely the basic roles of human rights, international law, humanitarian laws, and pushing forwards a neoliberal agenda. And I think the first of those powers, basically, since a very long time, is Russia. And we come back to Russia, but of course, we could add a lot of other countries, like, of course, Iran, like Syria, and China, obviously. And I think, on the other hand, we have another zone, in the world, which is a complete area, which is basically the democratic powers and the people who are pushing forwards, on the contrary, a liberal agenda, standing for human rights, and also trying just to defend and to protect all the democratic fighters around the world when it comes to basically, it could be in the streets of Moscow, in the streets of Minsk, in Algiers, could be, of course, in Myanmar right now, could be, in Hong Kong, could be also for the people, willing to defend their right of freedom, the right of under the rule of law, in many places in the world. And I think basically we have to stand for those causes, because it really represents the future of the world, I think. And I think that many European leaders, just to come back to your questions, for a very long time didn't realize that really the liberal, not order, but I think only the liberal countries and the democratic life is under threat. under stretch, really, not only because domestically we are witnessing the rise in many countries of the far right or radical left or other illiberal groups, but also because we have foreign powers that want to undermine, in the public mind, in the public spirit, the very concepts of freedom. I will just give you an example, for which is Syria war, because of course I wrote extensively on Syria since about 10 years. Just see what happened in Syria. Basically, we probably had, in Syria, mostly because of attacks on the Syrian civilians, probably more than 1 million persons who died, not only the one who were directly attacked, but the one who are suffering, starvations, deprivation of good, deprivation of medicines, and all the side effects of the war. 1 million persons, and we know who the culprits are. We know that also that a country as Russia, and I would talk more not the country itself, but the Russian regime, basically has killed more Syrian civilians than ISIS. And we are still able to sit and to shake hands and to smile to Mr. Putin. I think we have just to represent what it means when it comes to the public mind. We see we can discuss, we could have a free talk, we can smile, we can have we can watch together, a football match as it was in the World Cup in the 2020 with someone who has committed imprescriptible crimes. And I think we have really to understand what it means in terms of public consciousness, historical consciousness.
Yes. If I may pick up from that, perhaps from the end. I mean, thank you very much for mentioning Syria as a case. I mean, it happens to be a case very, very dear to me in some ways, because I was part of the Brussels bureaucracy when the Syrian conflict unfolded. I was in fact sitting in the chair of the desk officer in the European External Action Service dealing with Syria. And we really saw the facts on the ground, how the regime started shooting into their own people, how it then came to the chemical weapons, all the atrocities and horrific things that unfolded in the years to come. And of course, we saw that what we planned at the European level, including in the whole group of member states and so on, for some reasons then was ineffective to the response. Maybe we learned from our mistakes, maybe not. But let's not focus on Syria too much. As you said, then those who are similar to the criminal Syrian regime and Russia, I mean by that, came to their help very strongly. And we again, as the democratic West, were not really able to put up with the Russian intervention. We thought it's too complicated in Syria, and the Russians will soon learn their lessons and will run away. And of course, they didn't. They engaged in a very, very strategic way. But I have a question for you on the really big thing that you mentioned, the global confrontation. I see one plus side in the last years, namely that it feels as if the non-democratic oppressive regimes have revealed themselves to some extent. China, if you want, with the ascent of the new president, changed course a lot from the kind of under the surface, smiling behind the scenes force into a very open stage, frontal, face-to-face power, which is very allergic to any criticism of it, which openly now treats any discontent in Hong Kong with force. They do things in Xinjiang with the Uyghur population. And to some extent, we have reacted to that now jointly as Europe, US, Canada, UK, and so on. But the very fact that they have revealed themselves, I think, is positive, because it's less dangerous in a way than if they had continued doing these things. in a hidden or covered manner, in fact, trying or succeeding in ruling more and more parts of the world. Russia, I mean, to some extent as well, what happened with Navalny, that huge loss of face, I think, or credibility, or maybe only in my view, maybe, but I think it's also a positive that many of those in the West or in other parts of the world who were neutral or ambiguous about Russia, even perhaps after Crimea and so on, and now with the Navalny things, have come to the conclusion that they are what they are. So where do you see this whole thing heading? I mean, I thought I heard you saying it would be best to kind of stop any communication, stop shaking hands, stop talking with them. And let's just remember yesterday, no? The French president and the German chancellor had a good chat with the Russian president, the three of them. But is this, do you think this is the way to go kind of for the world? Would this not bring about a new total polarization, ultimately leading to a large-scale open conflict, possibly even a hot conflict or a war-like scenario, which I believe everybody should want to avoid? So very much interested in your thinking on this.
Thank you very much. I think it's absolutely the pivotal question right now. I think that certainly we have to continue to discuss with those powers, obviously. And I don't think that we can break down, all the communication channels between the democratic powers and those states, Russia, China, and others. Maybe it could be a little bit different for Assad, certainly, but for Russia and China, I think we have to continue to discuss. But what it means exactly to discuss? Well, we can discuss from a position of power. It means that if we are able to say no, if we are able to take actions, if we are trustworthy, in our threats to the regimes, I think then certainly we can discuss. But if we say, and I think that's a tendency that we can observe, in France, in Germany, but also in the US, I must say, even with the Biden administration, which is a good administration, strong, and I think it was doing a lot, in the change of the perception towards Russia and China. But still, we have sometimes the temptation to show, and also with Joseph Borrell, to say, okay, we have certainly to deter Russia and China. We have certainly maybe to discourage them. We have to sanction them. Okay, but still we have to engage with them. And then the question is, what exactly means engagement? And I think that if we consider the very natures of those powers, and especially, what propaganda, is doing, it's always very risky because, any weakness could be exploited by those powers, in their narratives. Just to give you an example, if we say, okay, we have to sanction Russia or China because of the human rights violation, war crimes against humanity, but on the other hand, we will build Nord Stream 2. And of course, we have to discuss with them on, let's say, climate change issue, maybe on the vaccines. Then the people in Russia, the government in Russia and China will say, okay, you see, okay, they are blaming us for the violation of alleged, they say, war crimes. But on the other hand, they want to discuss trade issues. They are ready to deepen our economic relations. They want our vaccines. They want our gas. They want, of course, to have some common projects on climate change. So basically, we are not so evil if they are doing that. And I think the risk, I'm not saying that we must not, of course, discuss with them, but the risk is also, in the perception of the public, and because, of what the Russian or Chinese propaganda or Syrian or Burmese, etc., propaganda are doing, there is a risk, in the public mindset of the Western people within the Western democracy, in fact, to whitewash their crimes. And the perception could be, well, they're crime, okay, they are not good. And then we have also, and that's of course on which what on the propaganda is playing with, the tendency also to have a kind of whataboutism, to say, okay, we have the crimes committed by Russia, in Syria, Ukraine, Georgia, as stated the European Court of Human Rights very recently, and we have, of course, the crimes against humanity or even crimes of genocide, in the think tank, and the human rights abuse, and we see also that Russia is causing up to the military junta in Myanmar, okay? But you see what the Americans were doing in Vietnam, what they were doing, with the Abu Ghraib prison, in Iraq. We saw also what the coalition did, in Iraq and Syria. Also, we had a lot of fatalities among the Syrian or Iraqi civilians, etc. So basically, we cannot accept lessons from you. And I think that's also a true issue, because that's a weapon of the propaganda, even, of course, if what they were doing ourselves is not an excuse. We have also not to say it's exactly the same. It's not exactly the same. We have certainly to look our past history very clearly. And we have to recognize and to acknowledge that we were doing crimes, as, of course, Germany did, as, of course, also France during the Vichy period did, because, in fact, it was the French state who decided just to send, the Jews to the Germans, and then they were murdered, in Auschwitz or Treblinka or Majdanek concentration camps. Okay, we have to acknowledge our faults. And the main difference is that in France or in the US or in the UK or in Germany, we have, of course, legal jurisdictions. And we have, of course, the legal means to recognize the crimes that we made. In Russia and China, there is absolutely nothing. In Syria, there is absolutely nothing. In Myanmar, I know there is absolutely nothing. And that's, I think, the main difference. And I think it's very important not to let, the agenda when it comes to human rights, when it comes to justice, dictated by those powers. And so basically, just answering your question, I think, yes, we have to discuss, we must have channel of discussion with Russia, China, and others. But I think if we continue to make trade with them and then to turn a blind eye to the crimes they are doing, eventually they will win.
Thank you very much for that. It's very much goes in the direction that I think as well. So indeed, thank you for putting it so clearly. I think that the flip side of this question of what to do with these adverse powers or non-democratic powers is how can we organize? And you spoke about we need to deal with them from a position of power, because otherwise it will not work. And what does it mean then practically for the world as it stands today? And we have seen some new concepts or initiatives, indeed, from the American administration. Biden, when running for the election, spoke and wrote about a community of democracies and summit of democracies that would be coming up early in his presidency. But there's been some silence since his beginning in the office on this particular intention. What we are now also seeing is another initiative coming from Britain this time, where the Prime Minister talks about transforming the G7 group of countries into a D10 group of countries, where you would have a clearly defined group then, of which, of course, many democracies would not be part, but that's one option, different from Biden's community of democracies, which is not defined very well now, where you would have immediately the issue of who is on the guest list, and do some of the European countries, for example, not very far from Czechia, which have been democracies over the past decades, but now are facing some tough challenges. Would they be on the guest list? Would some others be there from Africa, Middle East, and so on? So kind of conceptually, this appears to be difficult. And again, I wonder how you see that.
Well, I know that's conceptually very difficult. I think there are many, many questions, and that's probably because the idea, that was launched by not only President Joe Biden, but also by Anthony Blinken and also by Jake Sullivan. There was a working group within the Atlantic Council where, of course, just framing a kind of documents, defining those kind of principles. And finally, probably, they are, as you remarked rightly, they are not that vocal about that. But still, they are pushing the concept forwards. Basically, I think that the Biden administration right now has a human rights agenda, very strong. If we consider, all the declaration, not only by Biden himself, but also by Blinken and Sullivan or other deputy secretary of states, it's very clear that's something that we have certainly to deal with. I think you have then two questions. First of all, I think when it comes to the idea of the community of democracy, I think it's very important to know who is here or is on all sides and who is not. And I mean, which are the countries who are basically accepting this kind of agenda, which is basically rule of law, human rights. And within human rights, you means, of course, also gender equality. You can have means, of course, the LGBT rights. You have a lot of issues like this kind of things. But basically, I think we have a set of principles that, all the different countries should recognize. And they can recognize that the country who are not abiding by those principles, basically, they are not part of the community of the democracy. And it means also that as long as we will have some countries within the UNSC, and especially two of their permanent members who are not complying with those principles, so basically I think that the UN cannot be, and that's a very practical consequences, a useful tool to confront the abuses against human rights that are perpetrated worldwide. And I think that we have probably to define and to redefine and to have a kind of declaration of the countries, basically, who are recognizing, acknowledging those set of principles as theirs. And I think that's the first thing. Then we have to recognize, basically, I think when we've said that, what's the concrete agenda? What's the concrete agenda? And I think we have also certainly to better coordinate within the democracies in our action or reaction vis-à-vis Russia, China, but also Syria, Myanmar, and maybe also Saudi Arabia or other countries when they are perpetrating this kind of violation. I mean, what should we do? And then we have something very concrete. And I think, for instance, I was just mentioning the question of Nord Stream 2. Is it acceptable to have something like this kind of pipelines that is providing basically money that could be used by a country to continue their aggression abroad and the crackdown on human rights at home? I think that's a true question. We could have also a common agenda when it comes to the Uyghur questions, And formally, we could have a set of regulations not to trade and not to accept Western companies, purchasing cotton produced, in Uyghur farms or fields. And I think that's also something which is very, very concrete. We could have also some limitation of selling some product to those kind of powers, not only weapons, but also some technological, very advanced, product. Probably we could have a general ban. And then when it comes to the question of sanction, I think we have a common list of people sanctions, or rather common, between the EU, the US, and also Canada, etc., and Australia up to a certain point. That is good. But probably we can say, well, there must be a common action just to stop the flow of money coming from our own country to those powers. And mostly, I think the question of the fight against kleptocracy, against corruption, is absolutely vital. And I think that we have some common regulation to put in place in order to sanction and to disclose and then to freeze the assets of all the people that are, either in Xi Jinping's or Putin's inner circle. And other dictators could be African dictators, other Asian dictators, of course, in South America, etc. Whatever. And I think that there could be some common principles. And I think that the fight against corruption and kleptocracy is absolutely vital. There is another recommendation that, I was proposing, in one of my last pieces, which is also to have some common rules to track the money. We know, especially that, in the West, could be in Czech Republic, could be in France, could be in the UK also, could be in the US, you have some peoples and also some think tanks, some research centers receiving money indirectly from those powers. Mm-hmm. And I think that the true issue, and there could be some common rules for transparency, just to protect, our countries against foreign influence and propaganda. And I think that's the kind of concrete agenda that, the community of democracy can push forward. Then maybe the last answer to your question. Of course, I am not very comfortable with Boris Johnson's idea of G10 because he wants to invite India. And I think there is an Indian problem. Is India right now under Narendra Modi a true democracy? And I think that's something that is highly questionable. Certainly.
Indeed. Thank you for this broad overview, including also the very practical proposals. Yes, I think it's vital. Many things have been done, are being done in the international financial domain. Perhaps less about corruption and more about terrorist financing and things. But I believe the corruption thing is getting bigger and bigger profile. Hopefully, in the long run. If for the close perhaps of this discussion, because it shouldn't last too long, I'm told, if we come down from what should be done to the more practical level of who and how should really do it. We are members of the European Union, and we are seeing positive efforts at the EU level with regard to these issues. Let me again name the latest sanctioning exercise vis-a-vis Chinese officials and Xinjiang, as well as Myanmar and so on. But there are limits to what currently the EU level as a whole can do. Member states play their own roles quite strongly. For the Czech Republic, given our post-communist revolutionary, if you want, democratic tradition since 1989, this in general, and certainly to the foreign policy establishment, is the overwhelming approach, the path we should go to be not compromising about basic values such as democracy and human rights and so on. But in other countries, the situation is more complicated. So if I may, indeed for the close, bring it again to France, taking the opportunity that you are French, teaching at Sciences Po and with so much insight. Where do you see France going around these issues? And is it good? Is it bad? Are the political actors on the French scene differing in these issues? Not speaking about the extremists, or perhaps speaking about them as well, because we should know them. So how the French player will evolve in this?
Well, I think when it comes to the French players, I think that probably Especially, I think President Macron had a lot recently of disillusion vis-à-vis Putin. And that's something that I told him very, very frankly since many years. I say, yes, please consider, first of all, that Putin's regime is a criminal regime and that Putin regime is a mafia regime. And I think that he was considering still from a long time Russia. But no, with what happened with Navalny, with the attacks, on the European soil, with, of course, a better awareness of the very nature of Russian regime, I think that, the stance has a little bit changed. Still, here is, I think, in the illusions that we have probably to consider that there could be a new Russia, that Russia could be part of Europe, that we have to maintain a channel of communication. But I think there is absolutely no more naivete, from his part. So what I do hope, and I think that in my view, that I'm not talking, because I am not Macron's advisor, certainly. What I would suggest personally is that we have certainly to take the lead, in the fight, against those criminal regime. And I remember that President Macron also at the UN General Assembly in 2017 and 2018, he was saying very clearly that he is siding with the human rights defenders, with the fighters for freedom, he said. Exactly. And he said in 2018 that the human rights values were really universal, and that absolutely no country could say because of the alleged diversity that they do not need to adopt the same values. There is something that universalism is back, and that's part of the French tradition, universalism. And I think that we have, of course, certainly to push this kind of agenda. First of all, I think we have, as I said, certainly to push the agenda of the fight against corruption, but we have to do much more. And that's something that I am trying just I don't know if I will be successful or not, to convince the government that I think we have to do more. And I think that's exactly the case for all the EU countries and for the US and for Canada and for Australia, etc. We have to do more to support the civil societies, the free medias, the universities, the political prisoners in those countries. Just see what happened in Belarus right now. And I think, for instance, we have certainly to do more to help the civil society. You have some European funds. I think you have 14 million euros to help the civil society, but that's absolutely better than nothing, certainly. But it's not enough. And I think we have to make clear to Mr. Putin that he has not to interfere, in Belarusian affairs. That must be certainly the will of the people, in Belarus that should prevail. It means that if we are just saying, okay, we are standing with the people in Belarus, we are acknowledging Svetlana Tikhanovskaya as a true leader, etc. Okay, that's good. But what we do, is Putin is trying to impose the successor of Lukashenko, to have another strawman, becoming president after Lukashenko. So I think the question is that, what should we do very concretely? And then I think we have really to unite and to see that, okay, we may have divergences with the US when it comes to trade issues, etc., certainly. But basically, when it comes to the defense of democracy, when it comes to promoting and protecting Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, there must be a common position. And personally, I'm talking as a Frenchman, I think that basically we have certainly to be more vocal on defending the values of the alliance. We are part of the alliance, and that's absolutely vital.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Mr. Tenzer. It's highly interesting and to me really useful discussion. I think we have stretched the time limits of this interview format of Forum 2000 already. So we should now make a break. Thank you again. And I believe for Forum 2000, I can say that we would very much like to continue working with you for the future as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tainov. My pleasure, and see you very soon in Prague.